please. Good, if you want to sit down. Boşun Bolorin, hello everyone. Anglerin tehayrin ontasım. Okay. Because Anglerin hosen hakkenerik. Welcome everyone to AUA Acopian Center for the Environment. I'm the director of the center. We are thrilled to have our longtime friend and colleague, Jindřich, how do you say your last name, Chlapek? Chlapek. From the Czech Republic. He had spent a couple of years here in Armenia, working on alignment on the twinning project, working on the alignment of Armenian legislation with EU biodiversity legislation. This was a couple of years ago, right, Jindřich? And so a great deal of work was done in that process. And also Jindřich became extremely familiar with Armenia and its ecosystems and its biodiversity. So when he talks about forest management, grassland management, he can very much relate it to the Armenian context. And we're grateful that the Czech Conservation Agency has supported this initiative, and he's been able to travel to Armenia. And this talk, and yesterday there was a workshop for public sector officials about landscape, protected landscapes, and that was very effective. They were and Jindřich led that. And today this is the public talk on sustainable management of forests and grasslands. And this is part of our Road to COP17 initiative. The Road to COP17 initiative is a partnership between the AUA Acopian Center for the Environment, the Armenia's Ministry of Environment, and Secretariat of the Convention on Biodiversity and Biological Diversity. And what we plan to do, and in case you haven't seen these, I invite you to our website every chance I get. So if you go to ace.aua.am and you go to Road to COP17, but I'm going to go to the project page. And here you can see the kind of activities we have planned for Road to COP17. There's a launch event that we did in September, an international conference we did in October, and we have a series of workshops, professional technical workshops. Yesterday's and today's are part of those workshops, series of workshops. And if you go here, by the way, you can, all the talks and presentations are here. The international conference presentations, the entire video is here. And this is now, in this category, we'll be organizing a number of workshops around different thematic areas related to different expert groups. What should academics know about Convention on Biological Diversity? What should media know about Convention on Biological Diversity? What should, ecotourism, tourism operators know about biodiversity? So that next year, around this time, October 18th to 30th, we're going to have 30,000 people coming to Armenia over a 2-week period, and all of society has to be ready for that. So this is our attempt, our effort to prepare as many groups as possible we can possibly reach out to, and these are being recorded, by the way, these workshops, and they will be available online. You can later on refer to them, talk about it, disseminate it, and to amplify the impact of Armenian society getting ready for COP17. And one thing I think I want to emphasize every time I get a chance, COP17 is not about Armenia. This is the Convention on Biological Diversity's conference of the parties. They are coming together to discuss the global agenda. Armenia is hosting it, and Armenia will take the presidency of the COP of the conventions, this conference of parties, for the next 2 years. So this is a unique opportunity for Armenia to have a role as a global leader on something. I don't think there's any precedent for this, right? So this is the first time Armenia will have a global leadership role on a global topic. So we need to be very informed about the global biodiversity agenda. This is not about Armenia's biodiversity, which of course is part of the global agenda, and we should think about it, we should frame it, we should present it, we should understand it, but we should also very much understand the global biodiversity agenda, which is defined with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, KMGBF. GBF sometimes is what they call it. And I invite all of you to become familiar with the GBF. It is what is now the world talking about, what the world is talking about. And there's some very critical goals that are set. Once again, very ambitious goals. By 2030, all countries have 30% of their territories becoming protected areas. Okay, let's try. Okay, greater emphasis put on this what is it? Alternative. I forget the acronym. The alternative biodiversity protected areas. OECD. Other, effective conservation, protection measures, conservation measures, which would mean you don't necessarily only have to have official state protected areas. There could be other alternative areas that follow some standards and could be considered part of the 30%. So all of that is being discussed and defined. And this COP in Armenia, there's a big agenda, global agenda that's going to be discussed, and then Armenia as a host country can have its host initiatives, and we're breathlessly waiting for Armenia to announce its host initiative. But the global agenda, one of the key things that will be covered in COP17 is review of the global biodiversity framework and countries' ability to make advances on it. So Armenia is in a unique position of taking on the presidency of reviewing, midterm review of the success of the world in meeting the GBF targets. There are 23 of them. Okay, so with that, we as a society need to get ready to host globally. There is plenty of experience globally on hosting COPs. This is the one in Belém right now is the climate change conventions, climate conventions COP that's taking place. Last year it took place in Baku, the 29th and the 30th one. But with biodiversity and combating desertification, the COPs don't happen every year, they happen every other year. So 2 years ago it was in Cali, and now last year was in Cali, and next year it will be in Yerevan. A lot is waiting for us. I want to congratulate all Armenians. We're going global. Okay. So with that, Jindřich, we're excited to hear your talk. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for a very nice introduction. And again, congratulations to Armenia to being a global leader of the biodiversity efforts to protect, to conserve world's biodiversity. So I'm really honored to be here in the capital of biodiversity for these, let's say, 2-3 years. And I would like to a bit contribute to discussions how we should protect the nature and how we can manage not only protected areas, but any, let's say, habitats, both inside and outside protected areas. So my talk is about sustainable management of forests and grasslands. What should be considered when talking about this and managing these, I think the majority types of habitats, especially grasslands, are dominant in Armenia. When talking about sustainability and using the word sustainable, I mean we need to take into account all functions forests and grasslands provide site. So it's not only hay or source for grazing or timber, fuel wood, etc., but it's also biodiversity. It's necessary, indispensable part of these ecosystems and habitats, and these should be also considered. So, but first of all, I would like to start shortly with highlighting or mentioning the fact that our planet is not in a good shape, and that's why all these COP global meetings are being organized. Currently there is a COP30 on climate in Brazil, so let's hope that we will get some good results and outcomes from this COP. Next year you will be hosting this big event on biodiversity, etc. So in this scheme we can see that 7 out of 9 global limits have been already reached. So once you can see the green means the limit is okay, but once you can see orange color in any type of limits or indicators, it means that these are already overcame and these are in a bad shape, including climate change and land use and fresh waters, etc., etc. So, and also the biosphere, you can see over here, biosphere integrity both on the level of genetics and functional. So, and biosphere is critical for us, for our future, for sustainable life, for ecosystem services, for our health. So that's why we are talking all the time, and we spend too much on biodiversity, not only talking, but monitoring, doing research, and especially protecting it. So yeah, this is the biosphere issue. So what are we going to talk about today? I would like to introduce, maybe you are familiar, maybe not, with the disturbances and their role in ecosystems. It's quite new concept, let's say, worldwide, being introduced to the nature conservation activities throughout Europe. And it's not easy, it's quite easy to understand, but it's not easy to explain. It's not easy to get public on our side to understand what disturbances really is. So maybe in Armenian language, disturbance has a bit negative meaning, perhaps. So take this word for today and also for your future thinking about nature as a really some neutral phenomena, which definitely is important for vital ecosystems. However, they can look really devastating sometimes. They bring opportunity for many organisms and for biodiversity. And these disturbances are just part of natural dynamics. However bad they can look like. So almost all terrestrial ecosystems are to a certain extent product of disturbances or outcome of disturbances. So the natural disturbances is some kind of range of impacts which can create habitats or niche for many species. And there are different types of disturbances, and I would like to show you many examples, not only from Armenia, from Czech Republic, from other countries, which are important. And the critical when talking about disturbances is to understand what is the natural range which keeps the ecosystem within its boundaries and can enable to let's say, be restored by itself, and what is behind the range. And in some cases, we already are far behind the natural range of disturbances, negatively affecting its biodiversity and all its services and functions they provide. And on the other hand, the same happens when disturbances completely disappear. So again, we can expect some changes in habitat structures and in species composition. So there is lots of species directly depending on more or less regular or irregular, but in some kind of disturbances. So what actually disturbance is? Here you can see some possible definitions or views. So it's any external impact affecting the structure and diversity of particular site or ecosystem, changing its structure. So we can see the example of the river, which is nice and natural. You don't have that much stretches of natural rivers like this Arpa river in Vajoczo region on this picture. So it's mostly irregular, thus unpredictable. Just it's one-off, it happens once in time and then it can repeat, but no one knows when. But still it comes back. It varies in frequency and also severity. I mean, the intensity of its impact, it's really various and usually acts quite quickly. So to understand the natural disturbance regime, yeah, we can look here, it's in Siunik region, I think it's in Kajaran if I remember well, this large-scale quarry. This is also disturbance, so some people say, okay, it's a disturbance, it may be natural. No way in this case, of course. This quarry completely disturbed, completely devastated this site and this ecosystem and its stability. Species disappeared, etc., etc. The soil has been removed, so it means there is something completely new. On the other hand, we have lots of old quarries for example, in our country, which are in intensively used agricultural landscape, abandoned quarries, old quarries which are not used anymore, which are kind of hotspot of biodiversity. So even these crazy places in the future, when restoring, or recultivating in a good way, can be restored. Some good habitats can be restored in this site. And as it was already mentioned, it depends on frequency. The impact and the range, to understand the range, and dominant species resistance to the disturbances, and also resilience to disturbances. It means how quickly they can come back and they can restore their populations after disturbance happens. And important is that we cannot have just one type of disturbance. We can have combination of factors acting in one moment, and then it's even more tricky and complicated to understand how disturbance acts for this. So the scale of disturbances is really also very diverse. We can have disturbances on the regional scale, on the regional range, in even tens of square kilometers, like typhoons, eruption of volcanoes, maybe some in North America or in Siberia. We witnessed huge bark beetle outbreaks, completely changing, let's say, tens or hundreds of square kilometers, even thousands of them. War also in Ukraine, we can see it's a huge disturbance. Of course, absolutely negative, not talking about impact on society, that's horrible, but also on environment, not only biodiversity, but also environment. And forestry and any human activities like forestry and agriculture brings some energy, some different energy to the system, which some species can profit from it, some species not, but I will show you a couple of examples when it's to a certain extent sustainable, when it's over the sustainability. Local floods, windstorms, landslides, again bark beetle, forestry should be also small scale. Even the minor ones like avalanches acting very locally, or tree fall, or some animals can cause also interesting and important habitats when disturbing natural structure of ecosystem. And very tiny, like molehills and hollows, which are made by woodpeckers, as you can see on this picture, can affect the particular tree, can create new habitats for other animals and fungi, perhaps, etc. So the scale is very different, And all these types or all these ranges should be somehow taken into account even when planning activities in protected areas, for example. And now I will guide you through various disturbances so that you can see, you can understand what are the outcomes, what we can do with them, and how they impact to the ecosystems. So first one is, in this case, it's a windstorm, and it can completely, in case of forest, because windstorms in case of grasslands cost almost nothing, but in case of forests, you can see that it can just uproot one tree, it can uproot few trees, and it can uproot completely the whole forest, or some trees can sustain, can still be growing, can survive this impact, and then they can grow in a completely different way. So I will summarize later what's the real outcome of these types of disturbances. Another one is avalanche, which, let's say, keeps the habitats treeless without trees, because it can, once in 10, 15, I don't know, even 50 years can fall down some huge avalanches in the mountains. It can make such a clearing, like you can see here, openings in the forest and creating completely new habitats. And I experienced not an avalanche, but one, let's say, result of avalanches here in Grasslands. I can't remember exactly. It's one sanctuary, very nice sanctuary, and also after avalanche, it looks like this. So you can see all the trees are fallen, trees are destroyed. It's a pity, it's a damage. It's not a damage, it's part of nature, and you can see this is mostly birch trees, so they can regenerate quite quickly. And Grasslands, it's in Megrazor. Yes, thank you. It's not easy for me to fix it, Armenian names. So yeah, that was really nice. And as I said, it's on the first side you can see, okay, this is something bad is happening, but something bad can bring great opportunities for many species, bringing light to the dark forest, creating dead wood, etc. I will summarize it later. Another completely disturbing ecosystems, even beyond its limit, but it's still in some areas of the globe are volcanoes or explosions of volcanoes. Of course, the forest can be completely changed or disrupted. They disappear, and the succession starts from scratch, from zero. There was nothing, so it's just really interesting. And still, there is some kind of, let's say, heritage of this event, which creates something special, something new. I think you know the case of Mount St. Helens in US, where it was. This is picture from Kamchatka, but it was in Mount St. Helens. There was, I don't know, hundreds or even thousands of hectares of forest completely affected, and there are many researches going on in this area, following or checking what's happening there in terms of biodiversity and restoring. So it was a huge disturbance. Landslide, in some places very common, in some areas not at all. I'm not sure whether you have this kind of disturbance. This is from Caucasus, Georgia, but it happens anywhere in the mountains. It is devastating for the forest. It can bring a lot of material to the villages downstream, but still it is interesting. These habitats of all the time moving stones and gravel and any other material is again, it's a habitat for completely different group of species and interesting for. So of course we are not going to, let's say, introduce or induce any type of landslides. I'm just talking that it is kind of disturbance here, and it may happen. And yeah, of course in Alps, for example, they spend a lot of money to prevent any landslides and avalanches. So it's a main topic for the management in the mountains, because it's quite densely populated and it's about protection of lives. So, of course, in case of populated areas, these disturbances have really negative impact and negative meaning. I'm talking about, let's say, places, areas outside cities, villages, and cultural landscape in this case. And even this kind of small scale impact, like the tree falls down because it's old or because it's infested by fungi, is kind of disturbance which should be perceived as a neutral thing, as a neutral event which may have lots of consequences for biodiversity and for the forest. And even this should be also somehow considered when doing forestry and forest management. I will later on tell you why. So, and yeah, imagine the tree falls down, it can affect or it can somehow damage neighboring trees and damaging their bark as a protection against many animals which can harm the tree, but it opens, let's say, the gates for infestation of other trees, and it can have other effects for development of this small part of the forest. So it's not about falling down of one tree, but it's about affecting perhaps other trees, and again making some small opening, some small gap in the forest canopy. Very interesting. Floods, they usually come more or less regularly to some places, depending on intensity, and these, let's say, kind of disturbance, let's say, supports species which are adapted to this. So it happens only on floodplains, of course, very close to the rivers. Unfortunately, people build houses, build different infrastructure in floodplains, then we feel affected and threatened by floods. But in case we, let's say, give enough space to the rivers and respect floodplains with its natural or semi-natural habitats, then humans can even benefit from floods, bringing some nutrients and reducing, for example, invasive species. And we experienced really serious floods in Czech Republic last year, so there is a huge discussion what to do in current climate change, because these types of disturbances become more and more frequent, become more and more severe. So we need to deal with them to somehow to improve our resilience to all of this. And there are different types of floodings. Some can bring just water for a few hours or even for a few days. The flood disappears. Some animals also disappear because they are not used to survive in this, but other can be supported. But sometimes, especially the foothills, the flood is more quick and brings more material, and the material completely changes the soil and kills these stones when they're rolling down. They usually you can see the bark is completely removed from those trees, and the trees are dying. And again, a new process can start. Grazing, it's, let's say, we can talk about grazing of wild animals, we can talk about grazing of domestic cattle. This is case of domestic cattle, and it's a long-term impact of people on forest. It's a very traditional way of use of forest. Grazing here had been for millennia. It creates very interesting structures. Unfortunately, in our legislation, and I think also in Armenian legislation, grazing in forest is prohibited. But the question is, where is the border of the forest? Is this still considered as a forest or kind of open landscape, and it's a different type of land use? Or in this case, it really, let's say, keeps the landscape open and not completely overgrown by forests with dark undergrowth, and it is really something super interesting for biodiversity and also for local people to use this type of management. So we are introduced after 200 years of not grazing in a forest in our country. We are currently thinking how to introduce grazing back into some types of forests to create opportunity for species. And so we changed our view, and grazing in the forest formerly prohibited because perhaps it was too intensive and completely destroying forest, and it's about the balance, about searching the balance. So nowadays we are thinking how to do this, how to introduce it, and we need to change the law. And you can see some orchid species in openings in grazed forest. They thrive, they enjoy this way of management. So let's say biodiversity perspective becomes more and more, let's say, important when thinking about land use and management in land. So even grazing in forest is really good. And sometimes it goes together hand in hand with tree cutting. We call it copicing, which means a very short rotation period, and you have lots of forests in Armenia, which reminds, this is example from Turkey, and it's too much, I guess, because we can't speak about forests, it's just some shrubberies, and the rest is just grazed. So we can say in this particular case, over here it is already beyond its limits, because these shrubberies cannot fulfill the functions of kind of forest. They even cannot provide enough timber, enough firewood for locals, and yeah, the intensity of grazing doesn't, let's say, enable forest restoration in this part, because yeah, it's also quite dry region. And yeah, this is one example from Tavush, from Kopising forest. You can see maybe in 10 or 15 years period, people were used to come and cut all the trees, and then you have these structures when usually Carpinus orientalis grows from this, let's say, nests, or how to say. So this is way how these trees are adopted. They can sprout immediately, and in 15 years they produce forests like this, and people can come and cut it again. I don't think it's now acceptable in Armenia in a forest code, but also keeping the canopy open and using this way of forest management as a very traditional one, again, hundreds of years or even millennia, can help biodiversity and can even support, let's say, local people in collection of fuel wood. And grazing doesn't happen only is not used only in let's say, lowland forest or broadleaf forest, but also in a mountain forest. This is example from Alps. Again, very light and open forest. We can see even with dead wood, which is important for biodiversity, and lots of plants and insects. The traditional way of use, it is in this way sustainable, and yeah, making very interesting habitats and structure, fulfilling all its functions. Well, this is tricky, and I slightly announced that we will talk also about juniper forest in Armenia, which was really challenging to me to understand what's going on there because I experienced a few cases of wildfires in juniper forest. This is example from North America, from the United States, and yeah, there are species very well adapted to wildfires, because wildfires in these arid regions in western part of the United States are really well adapted to. Some species die out after forest fire, but it brings opportunity for them to open the cones and to spread the seeds, so they can regenerate very quickly, and the forest is back in 10-15 years. And then in next, let's say 50, 100 years, it can be burned again by just nature, by just accident. Yeah, usually, currently sometimes it caused by human activities, but usually it was caused by lightnings, yeah, natural. And another species like sequoias, you know them very well, are adapted to wildfires thanks to their really thick bark, almost some 30 centimeters, so they can easily survive, and it helps them to suppress their, let's say, natural concurrents or enemies. So yeah, and again, it opens gaps for next generation of sequoias, but they don't need it that much because they can live for millennia, thousands of years. So there are different adaptation strategies. Some can survive, some can let's say, for some it can be really useful for spreading seeds and samplings. And of course, in many cases, or sometimes, it can happen, sometimes fire and sometimes grazing of large herbivores also impacts the forest. So originally, without those herbivores and without fires, it would be completely forest. No grasslands, no steppe, let's say, habitats like this. But and these fires in these regions were also let's say, fires were supported by native people there for millennia. But these bisons and moose and other large herbivores create very interesting mosaic in the landscape. So yeah, and there are kind of ecosystem engineers, we can say, which keeps this very interesting and diverse balance, which can be also used by humans. Yeah. And now let's talk about a case of juniper forest in Armenia as kind of case study for considering disturbances, how they affect and what are the natural range of disturbance. Here is a picture from Arevik National Park, where the wildfire took place. I think it was autumn 2021, and I was there a few months after, and it looked like this. So complete, let's say, disaster. I think it was even 700 hectares which were affected by wildfire, and the juniper trees definitely died, all of them. This is another example from Khosrow forest, and the situation is about 5 years after the wildfire. It was in, I think I was told it was in 2017, and it's 2022, so 5 years after, and I was searching for any young plants of juniper, any samplings, and I couldn't find any. So I was thinking, okay, so there are fires as a natural disturbance which are important for certain forests and indispensable, inevitable part of their life cycle. And here we have wildfires in Armenia, but no regeneration. So does it need more time, perhaps, or what happens? This is a picture how it looks like in Khosrow forest. There you can see a few hundred hectares of completely changed habitat structure and losing its dominant species, which is Juniperus polycarpus and Juniperus foetidissima in this case. And another site, another place in Arevik again, but let's say it's 3 years ago, and you can already see that oak trees, I think it's Quercus araxina, anyway, oak trees regenerate quite well, but still no juniper trees. So I was still thinking, so how it can go together, the fires and juniper forest. You have so many juniper forests, and of course the climate is getting more extreme. It's more dry. The heat waves are longer. The number of days consequently going are, let's say, the periods of droughts without any rain are longer. And yeah, you can see that if you come in a good season, you can see lots of species there thriving or prospering, benefiting from the forest fire. And that was maybe one explanation from my side, and I didn't find any better explanation for this phenomenon. I mean, for fires in forest. You can see the structures here. It's again Arabic National Park, juniper forest, but these structures reminds us grazing. Yeah, so I think from my point of view, juniper forests have been for centuries and forever, we can say that juniper forests are results of human activities like grazing. Otherwise, we would have much more. This forest would be mixed, not only juniper, but we could meet there oaks, we could meet there other species like maples, I mean Acer ibericum, and there is a lot of broadleaf species which can survive in really dry conditions, even in quite low elevations of Armenia. So this is, let's say, a result of you can see that was definitely grazed for many centuries at least, or forever, because the tradition of human activities in this area is really long. And let's say grazing removes biomass from the forest or from any place. So there is not enough flammable material. There is almost nothing. Okay, there can be some fires, but they cannot spread because there is no food for the fire. But once we started protecting these areas, the grazing disappeared, or it was removed or pushed away, perhaps, and the biomass started accumulating in these areas. And when, let's say, summers are getting longer and drier, and temperatures also are rising, so the chance or likelihood for having fire is increasing, definitely. And with this, lots of material. That was the same case, the same story in the United States when they were fighting with fires and fighting all the time. So they were successful. So the small fires were extinguished. But at the same time, the amount of biomass, dead and dry biomass, was higher and higher. And then once you have a really huge wildfire, you cannot fight with this. And so it's just a result of change of land use, of change of human way of life. Since you don't have grazing there anymore, both in Khosrov, in Arabic, and in many other parts, in Vajodzor perhaps as well, in some places. But I also saw some juniper forests with grazing, and there is just nothing. There is almost no grass there. So the wildfire, okay, it can burn just one juniper, but it cannot go to the other because there is nothing. So it's interesting that we can consider it as kind of a result of strict nature conservation, of cutting the traditional way of life or way of management, and now we need to think what to do, how to deal with this fact that juniper forests are more prone or more sensitive to the wildfires. So definitely wildfires, forest fires are not part of the, seems to me, it's my idea, and you can discuss, and I will be really happy if you would have any different opinions and ideas. Seems to me that the wildfires are really not part of a natural disturbances in these forests, because they evolved hand in hand with the humans, with grazing, etc. So let's see what will be the next developments in these areas. We have lots of hundreds of hectares of such forests, and yeah, would be good to do some good monitoring to understand what's going on there, and to check which species are coming back, and maybe juniper will come back again. But juniper are usually species which is spread with help of cattle. They eat the fruits and then they can distribute them. You know how it works. Maybe sometimes birds also can work in this. But yeah, this is my, let's say, understanding of impact of wildfires to juniper forest after the forest grazing disappeared, and it goes together, unfortunately, with the climate the climate change. And here we experienced also a huge wildfire in Czech Republic in one national park. It was, we call it Czech Switzerland because it's a nice rocky area, and it was heavy. It was large scale. I think 1,000, slightly more than 1,000 hectares. But yeah, now we are, let's say, lots of scientists immediately came and established their plots, monitoring plots, focusing on insects, on plants, on trees, on other animals and species, and on soil, of course, also analyzing the impact on soil structures and composition. But this regeneration goes very fast, yeah? So it means, and they found some remnants of forest fire in a long history, that in this region, to the pine forests, the forest fire can come in 100 years period, let's say, and the succession of the development of vegetation starts with birch trees, betula, and then slowly other species of trees can come. And here it is, we had another fire 17 years ago. It was small scale, let's say 15 hectares. So this is how the forests look like I can say only 15 years, or 17 perhaps, definitely not 20, 17 years after the wildfire. So you can see the, I don't know, 10 meters tall birch trees and other trees are already entering the forest. So nothing bad happened, and the life cycle goes on in these forests. Another example, deadwood and different kind of species with dominant birch, betula species. Yeah, so this is how it works, how the forest fires can be perceived elsewhere, let's say. Another type of disturbance is caused by humans. You can see in tropics, we can have either typhoons, but for example in Borneo Island, there are no typhoons, no let's say impacts like this, but they are humans and they are doing their business and openings and creating new small farms, and after the soil is completely used and depleted, they move forward and it becomes overgrown by the forest again. So it depends on scale. Of course, if you change hundreds of square kilometers into the oil palm plantations, it's bad. Another disturbance is taking the wood from trees in this way. So it enables forest grazing, it gives shadow in hot summers for cattle, and it produces fuel wood for humans. Very traditional way of management of land use. Bark beetle, I already mentioned, it can affect large areas. But again, for the boreal type of forest, which are dominated usually by different spruce trees, picea trees, bark beetle is a native species, and sometimes when a few factors meet, like hot summer, low precipitation, it can erupt in this way. And it's nature also. You can see these pictures in few national parks of our country. Yeah, my favorite disturbance is caused by beaver. He's a really creative animal. It's an interesting creature, very active, building all the time something, and cutting the tree. So you can see, oh, this is, we can say, kill the beaver, you can protect the tree. But when looking at when taking, let's say, the ecosystem perspective and ecosystem understanding, it's super important for floodplain forest, creating so many diverse habitats related to the water, to deadwood, etc. So many other species immediately come when beaver starts his job. And fungi outbreaks again. So it's not a result of wind, but very tiny fungi affecting fraxinus, ash trees. And what is interesting, it's a human, let's say, activities. You can see crop fields. If managed extensively without herbicides, you can have in certain part of the season very nice fields. And I think you know these pictures It's from Siunik region. It's full of not only flowers but full of insects, etc. So it's a really extensive way of farming. I'm not sure whether the farmer is happy from this because the yield is not that great, but it is nice. And we cannot see anything like this in Central Europe. Unfortunately, farming in our country and in neighboring countries is so intensive that we are losing insects in really rapid speed, and this is one of the most critical process currently going on in Europe, that thanks to huge subsidies from the EU, the farming becomes more and more intensive and destroying everything. Despite we have very strict norms for using any chemicals and pesticides, still we cannot see anything like this beautiful picture. And when talking about grasslands, grazing, it's almost everywhere in Armenia, and it's important. It is really important but also we should identify the balance, and it's not easy, of course, to talk with farmers that are used to use these grasslands. But when, let's say, in this period, the production of the biomass with less precipitation is lower, so even grasslands are more, and pastures and long-term pastures are more and more sensitive to degradation and even to collapse, as you can see on these pictures nearly everyone. There's just no vegetation, and I think now looking at this, it's again completely beyond any natural range of use or sustainable. It's definitely behind sustainability because there is nothing to be grazed, and it's another good picture. But what I would, and this area, even they can look like desert, and we talk about desertification quite a lot, and desertification of course is caused by two main factors: human impact, human activities, and climate. But still, even in these conditions, under these conditions, even some trees and shrubs can grow. So without grazing, we can restore very nice mosaic, even in surroundings of Yerevan, nice mosaic of habitats. As Alan talked about the COP17 and Global Biodiversity Framework targets, one of these targets is to restore 30% of degraded land, degraded habitats in each country. So once you identify those degraded areas, and in this case it's quite easy, you can see drones, you can see any satellite imageries, you can start thinking how to restore, would be very interesting just to build set of fences here to look how it looks like without impact of grazing, how is the regeneration going on, whether it needs any help of humans, because once you are beyond the limits, then the natural regeneration may take really long time. So, and sometimes very basic help, like bringing bringing seeds of plants and shrubs or even trees, which can really survive in these harsh conditions, can help a lot to the natural regeneration. So it is wonderful opportunity for designing some interesting experiments showing what can be done in this area when thinking or when designing restoration, habitat restoration. And fires are used also when managing grasslands, and have been used for millennia. As you can see, without grazing, these thorny species, onobrichis, can completely cover the grasslands, and I'm sure you saw these examples many times. Where I think this is in Urz Ridge. So farmers are burning few of them to keep the grassland open because it's not attractive. These thorny species, astragalus and onobrichis, for grazing for cattle. So that's why they are burning. So this is very small scale, tiny impact or kind of disturbance, which is perfectly well and balanced, let's say, with the grasslands, at least from the biodiversity perspective and from the production or for the use of course, yeah, you cannot burn everything, that would destroy habitats for other species, but if you do it in this manner, and this is really fascinating to me, how just farmers living in the countryside, don't knowing anything about ecology, about disturbance regime, can do this very sustainable things. And yes, again, fires which have been used for 1,000 years everywhere to maintain grasslands and to protect grasslands against shrubberies or even afforestation, spontaneous afforestation. So these are cases also from Armenia, which are interesting to me because nowadays there is a new even movement, we can say, in restoration ecology to introduce fires to the management of protected areas in Europe, because we don't have enough sources for supporting farmers to graze some very remote areas. It would be really costly. So the only way how to keep the grassland open and how to support species diversity is to use kind of prescribed, well-designed burning. So of course this spontaneous burning brings this, and it's not good absolutely in Armenia, but on the other hand it's not easy to explain to the public, because all the time we say, okay, this kind of burning is bad, and absolutely it's fact, it affects the quality of air and etc. But yeah, sometimes when applied in a small scale, it can help. And in one national park in Czech Republic, they just burned, let's say, 1 or 2 hectares, and they observed it very carefully, and they said immediately after fire we saw spiders running on the ground and some beetles. So it means that if the biomass, if you don't have too much biomass, the severity or intensity of these fires are not harming even insects or any animals. So it's not so bad and so negative as it's been usually perceived. So, to sum up, let's say, what are the products or consequences of disturbances in forests? It's a much more complex structural diversity, like openings, gaps, even bare soil after uprooting the trees and gravel, etc. So one of the most important thing is deadwood in forest, which is really really extremely important. And of course there are let's say scientific papers identifying that about 30% of all species living in the forest are in some part of their life cycle dependent on deadwood. So deadwood is critical for healthy forests. So we need to consider deadwood, or how to introduce deadwood also to the commercial forest. In case of grasslands, you can see a nice example from, I think it's a Zangezur. It brings biodiversity. That's clear. Because yeah, and I was talking all the time about importance of disturbance, and if it's too let's say heavy, then it can be negative. But if it completely disappears, it can also bring some serious consequences. Once you lose this type of traditional way of management, this kind of disturbance, I mean grazing, the situation, or few species of grasslands can overgrow just the whole mountains, and these many species which are really weak in terms of fighting with other species, so they can completely disappear. And it's not only about plants and flowers, but it's also related to insects and birds which need insects, etc., etc. So the whole ecological food chain can be changed when this type of disturbance disappear. Yeah. So how to manage disturbances, how to work with them, and it's another, let's say, trend in Europe. I would like to highlight this point as quite new for us: veteranization of trees. It means if you don't have enough old, bulky trees with hollows and with, let's say, dead wood, etc., you can do, and people do, and also in protected areas, they can somehow wound the trees, injure the trees to make this kind of scars, creating, let's say, new opportunities for usually insects or some fungi. So there are scientific articles on it. If you don't have enough, or if you have very young forests, commercial forests, and you think how to support biodiversity, so then you can take a chainsaw and you can do some injuries to the trees, to selected trees, not to all of them, of course. They will survive, and yeah, they will give these new habitats. So yeah, I think it's written nothing special, nothing more than I already said. So to understand the disturbances and to follow disturbances is a must when thinking about traditional or sustainable way. And this is another picture, for example, from Moldova, again farmers doing very small scale, tiny types of disturbances, burning part of the grasslands, cutting it for hay and grazing either with sheep or with geese. So very interesting. I thought it was designed by some smart conservationists, but it's just spontaneous and very traditional way of farming. So you should identify how it works in the field. Where are some places with this traditional pattern of land use and farming, and work with this. The situation in Czech Republic and in Central Europe is not good. We have just intense crop fields without any weeds, without any plants, others than the crops, and then the sharp edge and the dark forest like this. So no transition zone, no space for biodiversity, just dark commercial forest, of course without any grazing, not being copies, and super intense farming on crops. So we definitely suffer from loss of biodiversity, and that's why it's wonderful for us to visit, to travel around Armenia and to enjoy diversity of your landscapes and habitats, and especially beautiful species. Yeah. The same ecosystem should be, let's say, result of any disturbance, maybe with slightly different structure and species composition. Yeah, and at the end, very few pictures to show what very basic type of, let's say, monitoring can be done to understand how it works. You can see a forest in one nature reserve in our country with dead wood looking really nice. But if you come exactly 16 years later and you do the same picture, you can see, you can come and you say, oh, there is no dead wood, the forest is not so interesting, it's even not worth protecting, but you need to have long-term perspective and to have understanding what's going on. So really exactly the same place, just 16 years later. Or this kind of, this is a spruce forest, natural spruce forest. Then the bark beetle outbreak happened, and exactly the same place looks like this. And the difference is, I think, about 10, 11 years. So the same trees at the same place, completely changed structure of the ecosystem, lots of dead wood. So we know, thanks to one research, that the number of beetles depending on dead wood increased very, let's say, significantly, and new forest is starting to grow without any human intervention. So we can expect that in few decades we will have more or less the same forest like this. And yeah, in Finland they do even prescribed forest fires just to support few very rare species of beetles. So this is way how in Finland they can do this crazy stuff. So again, picture from Arevik after in the juniper forest. So thank you. This is all from my side, and I'm really wondering what comments and ideas you can have, and we can discuss. I think we have time for discussion. Yeah.
Շնորհակալություն ներկայացման համար։ Ես Այսեր Ղազարյանն եմ, ոլորտի մասնագետ, ավելի քան 25 տարվա փորձով, տարբեր այսպես եւ ոչ պետական եւ պետական կառույցներում, միջազգային կառույցներում աշխատել եմ, ողջունում եմ եվրոպական փորձի ներկայացուցիչի պրեզենտացիան Հայաստանում, GIZ-ով աշխատել եմ Գերմանիայի, Ավստրիայի, Շվեյցարիայի եւ որոշ այլ երկրների եվրոպական լավագույն մասնագետների հետ, ինչպես անտառային, այնպես էլ արոտավայրերի մարգագետների, կառավարման եւ պահպանության մասնագետների հետ ուղղակի կապված ներկայացման հետ, որպես մասնագետ ավելի շուտ դա ունի իր օբյեկտիվ եւ սուբյեկտիվ պատճառներ, ենթադրություններով ուրեմն ներկայացրեցիք որոշ գործընթացներ, մասնավորապես գյուտներում ուրեմն սերմերով վերականգնման խնդրի մասով, հրդեհների եւ մյուս ուրեմն դրվագներով հասկանում եմ խնդիրը, քանի որ գործընթացներով 2018 թվականից եթե դիտարկում ենք հայաստանյան իրականությունը, ոլորտային դեգրադացիա գնացել եւ անտառների կառավարման եւ արոտավայրերի մարգագետինների կառավարման մասով եւ ներկայացման մեջ ես զգացի տեղական փորձագետների հետ աշխատանքի այսպես դեֆիցիտ, այսինքն կոնկրետ այս ներկայացված նյութերի մասով Հայաստանում եւ գիտական, մասնավորապես գյուտների սերմնային վերականգնման խնդիրների վերլուծման եւ գիտահեն հիմնավորումների մասով 2001-2002 թվականներին նույնիսկ հոդվածներ կան գիտական, թե ինչու է մեր հայաստանյան իրականությունում գիրու էկոհամակարգերը չեն վերականգնվում, չկա սերմերի վերականգնում եւ մյուս հարցերի մասով էլ եւս կան պատասխաններ եւ ավելի խորը վերլուծություններ եւ լուծումների ուղղություններ, ոնց կարելի է դա անել, առաջարկներ։ Առաջարկս հետեւյալն է, կարող եք ձեր խումբը կամ մասնագիտական խումբը կարող եք ոչ պետական, չգիտեմ, փորձագետների, որոնք որ իրոք ինստիտուցիոնալ հիշողություն են կրում, փորձառություն ունեն ոլորտում, ավելի մանրամասներ գիտեն եւ լուծումներ կարող են առաջարկել, կարող եք հանդիպել եւ այդ խնդիրների մասով լուծումներ տալ։ Եվ հիմա մենք խոսում ենք կենսաբազմազանության պահպանության մասին, որ մյուս տարի մենք COP17 ենք ունենալու Հայաստանում, կազմակերպելու ենք բավականին մեծ այսպես հրավիրվածների մասնագետներ, պետական պաշտոնյաներ այցելում են Հայաստան, բայց Հայաստանի կենսաբազմազանության պահպանության, էկոհամակարգերի պահպանության եւ կայուն կառավարման մասով մենք լուրջ խնդիրներ ունենք։ Այդ տեսեք դուք անտառների մասով խոսեցիք, այսպես դրվագային, մենք ունենք նոր մշակված կառավարման պլաններ անտառտնտեսությունների համար, եթե չեմ սխալվում 17 անտառտնտեսությունների համար մենք ունենք նոր մշակված եւ հաստատված կառավարման պլաններ, որոնք ես պաշտոնապես եմ հայտարարում եւ իրավական եւ տեխնիկական մասերով բավականին լուրջ բաստողություններ թերություններ ունեն, այսինքն դուք կարող եք վերցնել կառավարման պլանը իր համապատասխան միջոցառումներով գնալ անտառ, որպեսզի այդ միջոցառում անեք, եթե ընդունեք դուք անտառ կառավարիչ եք, ինչ-որ տնտեսության, անտառտնտեսության կամ ինչ-որ տնտեսվարող սուբյեկտի, դուք տեսնեք, որ իրականության հետ այդ պլանները կապ չունեն։ Հիմա մենք խոսում ենք անտառների սանիտարական վիճակի մասին, որ վնասված էր ծառը դուք ցույց տվեցիք, որ հատվում էր եւ այլն, նայեք մենք Հայաստանում ունենք, ինչպես դա Ռուսաստանում է, հասուն անտառների արժեքավոր հասուն անտառների, խոսքը մասնավորապես գնում է հաճարկուտների, հաճարենու անտառների մասին, ունենք կոմերցիոն հատումներ, սանիտարական հատումներ անվան տակ, այսինքն առողջ ծառերը պաշտոնապես առանց լուրջ ուսումնասիրությունների հատվում է որպես սանիտարական ծառեր, այսինքն հիվանդ, կիսաչոր, վնասված ծառեր, բայց իրանք իրականում նորմալ ծառեր են։ Եվ բավականին լուրջ խնդիրներ կան մյուս առումներով, այսինքն մենք պետք է հասկանանք, որ եթե մենք խոսում ենք կենսաբազմազանության պահպանության մասին, մենք դա բովանդակահեն պետք է անենք, էկոհամակարգային մոտեցումով պետք է անենք, որպեսզի կարողանանք այդ հարցերը լուծենք։ Այսքան է, շատ կա խոսելու բան, բայց թույլ տանք մյուսները խոսենք։ Եթե կրկնվեմ, անհրաժեշտություն կա, դուք կարող եք հասցեներով